Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Hello and welcome to today's Battle Mech review. Today we are going to be looking at the Whitworth, and today I have coffee. Things are going to be looking way up right now. Whitworth, a little bit of an odd mech, but also an odd name. It seems to be coming from a type of screw back in the old Terran days of the 19th century. One of the first standard piece of equipment that was used on a lot of both military and non-military equipment for the British Navy. British being a part of the origin of our friends in House Davion. Here we've got two basic Whitworth, and where I want to put a little bit more emphasis is on the leg assembly. On the right, you've got the original Whitworth with the original Whitworth leg assembly, which is rather terrible and requires a lot of maintenance and, well, falls apart if things get too rough. While on the left, we have the more modern Whitworth specialty leg assembly, which is a lot sturdier. Kind of the same thing we did with our javelins here in the Oregon Reaches. This assembly comes from inspiration, let's say, from other machines who have better legs and reassembled on the body. So let's get into it. The Whitworth is a little bit weird because apparently from historical record, it says that it's been around since the Age of War, but the first recorded Whitworths we have date from after the Age of War during the peacetime period of the Star League. I'm trying to find any of these early Whitworths, basically where they came from, who sold them, or anything. I'm looking at production codes, and the production codes make no sense. What we do have, though, is an early Star League era variant, the Whitworth 1S, which started coming out in 2610, which was meant as a scout hunter and a brawler, and it was, well, pretty completely inadequate. In 2689, we have the modified version of the Whitworth 1, which is really a fire support unit, which case it was rather inadequate, but just not wholly, so, you know, they kept building them. Another organization who had quite a few Whitworth was the Rimworld's Republic, and their inventory, once the Maris Kerensky big brawl was over, it kind of flew to the different successor states, with the majority of them ending in the hands of the Federated Sons or the Draconis Combine. A few of them ended in the hands of the Lyran Commonwealth in that region where they had connections with the Rimworld's Republic. But historically, we haven't seen that many Lyran Whitworths, so who knows what they really did with them. The Whitworth Company's facility was destroyed during the Ameris Civil War, so parts for the Whitworth became harder and harder to find. Most of them you had to hand machine, which always is a bit of a pain, especially when you don't have all of the specs. And it wasn't popular enough that no major companies were chomping at the bit to get one. By the end of the Fourth Succession War, a report says that about 300 Whitworth were still in service, which is not a whole lot, but still a significant amount. And it was mainly maintained by those and machine parts, prayers, and hopefully someone finding some spares in a facility somewhere. Things kind of turned around in 3035 when the Whitworth Specialty Manufacturing Company started producing new parts for the design in large enough amounts, and even working on modernizing the kit using recovered technology. You could also see a lot of older Whitworth that had been mostly destroyed being brought into the Whitworth Specialty Manufacturing location, and they were able to rebuild it more or less to standard. Overall, though, this still wasn't enough to really bring the Whitworth back to a full ascendancy here. By the 3060s, news and refurbished machines were sold to mercenary Periphery powers, and they were just not seen as good enough to be used on the front line of either fights between Inner Sphere powers, or especially when fighting the clans. New Whitworth are still being produced, however. You have some being produced in Draconis Combine space by the Whitworth Specialty Company, while there's also a bunch of them being produced in the Marian hegemony, using a new standard, a new engine, new missiles, it pretty much new everything except for the frame. Who knows where that will really go in the end? Maybe we'll see more in the future. We're going to talk about some of the Periphery kits that are available later on. But the Whitworth, I don't think, is going to be a major player in most fights. So now let's look at the actual machine. Your base Whitworth is still the WTH-1 Whitworth that came out in 2689. Even though it's not the first model of the series, it's the one that most people know. At 40 tons, it's at the low end of the medium, and it's usually a weight range that is not the best in service. And it's not really a fast one either. It uses an LTV 160 to go up to 64 kilometers per hour, which some people might find most people will find quite slow in that weight range. It's got 4 jump jets though, so you can bounce about 120 meters with it, but you do have to be careful because those leg assemblies on the original ones mostly are rather terrible. So if you do try to do those fancy det from above that some people try to do, well, you might end up having more problems than expected. The rest of the machine is really basic, even though it came out during a period where you add quite a few different advanced technology available. This one doesn't use any of it to make it a simple machine for export and for a regular use. You get 10 standard heat sinks on the standard chassis, and it's protected by 8 tons of standard plates, which is quite a bit on a 40-ton mech at least. So you're well protected. You're not going to overeat that much unless you really start being silly with your weapons. So it's a decent enough base setup. I'll start here with one of the biggest problems with the Whitworth. It doesn't have hands. So as a brawler, it's never going to cut it. The leg assembly being flimsy is a major problem as well because, well, you're going to have to use those legs to kick and jump and all that kind of stuff. But if you had hands on the Whitworth, it would basically be a tiny archer. Without the hands, well, if something gets close enough to you, well, you do have medium lasers to back you up, one in each arm and one in the head, right next to the cockpit. But this one, funnily enough, doesn't prevent you from ejecting properly or anything, unlike some of those you see on the things like the Vindicator, as an example. Everything else, though, on the design is fairly rugged, so they can take a beating and they can take extended amounts of service before you really need to start servicing the whole thing. And when you do, well, it's replacing all the actuators and the legs. For your main weapons, honestly, here, it's your pair of 10 rack LRMs in each side torso, which gives you decent enough long-range support. I mean, at 40 tons, having 20 LRMs in the era where this mech came out was perfectly reasonable and makes it a decent bombardment machine. You get 2 tons of ammo, might not look like a whole lot, but once specialty ammo start being available, it allows you to have that standard ton of ammo and one of something fancy. The original model of the Whitworth, however, had 14 standard heat sinks because it replaced the 10 rack LRMs with a pair of 6-tube SRMs. It's a decent brawler, but once again, since you don't have hands, if things really get to fisticuffs range with your shitty legs, you're not going to get very far. With the SRMs, though, you can have a little bit more flexibility, and as a scout hunter, it might work until you realize that it's a bit too slow. So it's quite inadequate for anything it really wants to do. The Amaris Dragoons had about 12 of the 1S machines rebuilt to a new standard called the Zero, where to replace one of the arm-mounted medium laser with a flamer, because using Inferno missiles and flamers to burn down entire cities is a whole lot of fun when you're having a little civil war. New Whitworths have been walking off the assembly line since about 30-35, well, new-ish. A lot of them were models from scrap heaps brought in to the Whitworth specialty factories, rebuilt from there. But by the time the clan invasion was in full gear during Operation Revival, if you're talking to the clans, or whatever operation the Inner Sphere was calling on their own against them. So by about 30-50, You had new Whitworths out of the factories, and you removed 2 of the medium lasers, and you exchanged them for Artemis guidance on the LRM racks to ensure better clusterings of the missiles and make it a better fire support platform. You take out the medium lasers in the arms, but you don't replace them with ANDs, so that's still a pretty bad deal, in my opinion. This particular model of the Whitworth, I am really not a fan of. I'd rather get the original Whitworth. It'll be better in almost every situation, which is a weird thing to say, since a lot of those machines that came out around Operation Revival usually have at least a few additional good points compared to the original ones. Later on, we did get a few new models in the wild, mainly in the Taurian Concordat and the Outworlds Alliance. They stole an idea from the Marian hegemony with what was later dubbed the Whitworth 1H. This one is based off the old 1S, so you start with SRM 6s rather than LRM 10s. But what you do is take out one of the SRM 6 tube, whichever, doesn't really matter, and you replace it with a set of 8 10-tube rocket launchers. You get a massive one-time punch if you don't control yourself. But I mean, even if you shoot half of those in one go, it's going to deal quite a bit of damage. Have I seen units with both sets of tubes swapped out for, 16 rocket launchers? Of course I did. I mean, I live in the Periphery near the Taurian Concordat. I've dealt with mercenaries, privateers, we'll use that term, and just general malcontents that do whatever they need rather than whatever is sensible. Here is one that I actually quite like, but for a different reason than what it is. The Whitworth 2A is not bad. It does what it's supposed to do on the 10, and it's not a fire support unit anymore. It is a dedicated brawler. But what it really does that is very different is get you an endosteel chassis and kind of fixes those leg assemblies. It's based off the 1S again, and rather than the 6-tube SRMs, you get 2 4-tubes streak launchers, giving you very good short-range punch and accurate short-range punch, so you will be able to make every shot count. The ammo is also kept in a case bin, making the Whitworth 2A fairly survivable. You do lose on the medium laser in the edit. It goes back to a small laser, so not great there. And your targeting array is tied to a C3 slave unit, which again it's okay if you're a Kurita. Aus Davion had quite a few C3 units as well around that time, so it can work. The problem with C3 is, as always, you need a master, and there's not that many mechs with master computers out there. Finally, it is cooled by 10 double heat sinks because at that point, it's easier to just build more double heat sinks than build single heat sinks. That's just a logistical kind of thing. Next up came the Whitworth 3, which came out in 3069 for use in the Capellan Marches. That's the border between Aus Davion and Aus Liao, if you're not familiar with the region. The body is made of endosteel. Once again, that's a great thing, and we'll see why later. And it carries 4 5-rack LRM launchers with 4 tons of specialty ammo. And that's really what they put on there. It was specialty ammo for all sorts of things. Smoke, mine launchers, follow the leader, semi-guided if they were able to buy them or steal them off Aus Merrick. There's quite a few different things you can do with 4 5-tube LRMs in this situation. You also get improved jump jets, so you're able to jump 180 meters. The main problem with it is that you've got nothing for self-defense, so you have to rely on those rather average legs if something gets close by to just try to kick your way out of it. Continuing on there, we've got the Whitworth K with Whitworth WTHK, which came out in 3070 from Whitworth Specialty Manufacturing directly, which is now a division of Lucian Armor Works Limited, all right reserved. As with many machine of the era, it features that C3 computer to allow for guidance, but it's the slave version, not the fancy improved version. And you get 5 improved jump jets to jump, once again, 150 meters, a little bit more maneuverability. For weapons, you get a pair of MML7s, which allow you to shoot both LRM and SRM, so you do have the ability to do bombardment and defend yourself. But the ammo capacity is a little bit limited, so you're probably not going to be carrying around all those fancy specialty ammos. Much more recently, Marian Arms Incorporated got a license to build the Whitworth, and they made it very, very Kurita at the same time. So much so that they use a very classic Nissan 200 engine from a Hunchback to make this new Whitworth go 86 kilometers per hour, which makes it a little bit more decent at brawling. The armor is replaced with 6.5 tons of heavy ferrofibrous, which gives you roughly the same protection as before for a little bit less weight. You get your medium lasers back. You get 2 ER mediums in the arms and 1 standard medium laser in the head. And your heatsink kit is replaced with doubles. Up till now, only positives. Your missile launchers are replaced with 10 rack MRMs with an Apollo guidance system and 2 tons of case-protected ammo in its Case 2s, so it's the improved and good version of it. I'm not a huge fan of MRMs normally, but with Apollo guidance, you get the same accuracy as a regular launcher. You get a little bit more range than those SRMs, a little bit less potential damage. You get less range than an LRM, but you don't have the minimum. It's a decent trade, and on a mech like the Whitworth, it's going to run you the price you want to run on a mech of this capability. And surprisingly for the Marians, they didn't stick, 72 rocket launchers on it instead. So now we talked about all the official models, and now let's talk about what happens in the Periphery and with a lot of mercenary groups, I would assume. From 3068 onwards with the 2A, we started having access to an endosteel chassis for the Whitworth. A lot, and not just Flanagan's, a lot of various refit yards across the Periphery had pretty much the same upgrade kit ready for Whitworths in case they came in using this particular chassis. The most common of the variants is the Whitworth wrench, which we've probably built around 26, maybe a few less, a few more, I'm not quite sure, recently in the last year or so, where you basically modernize your basic Whitworth. You put Artemis guidance in the launchers using the weight saved from the endosteel chassis, and you replace the 3 medium lasers with 3 ER medium lasers, generally the inner sphere kind. If you're bringing it to Flanagan's, it's likely going to be clan kind, depending on how much money you're willing to dump. This is coupled with a double heatsink kit. This doesn't make the price explode. It makes it work very well as a garrison or a point unit. It's not a huge improvement on the Whitworth, but it works, and that's what really matters to a lot of mercs out there. Another one that is known out there in the Periphery is the upgraded K series. That is not built by us. I had to fix a few, but I have had to deal with them being brought in for repairs. Sometimes nicknamed the KK Slider. It takes out the improved jump jets from that K series, same with the C3 Slave because nobody's got a master around these air parts, and tried to make it a functional little machine. You keep the MML7s, you have double heatsinks are installed, and rather than medium lasers, you've got ER medium lasers, and the ammo is kept in case bins. This one is quite expensive for a Whitworth. It's a big upgrade and a whole lot of work. And I would really only recommend getting something like that if you were a down on your luck mercenary and that's your command unit, or someone that wants to keep a Whitworth at the top edge of the technology curve. It's really up to you. I mean, at this point, something further than that would be replacing all the parts on the mech with clan gear, which is not a thing that I've actually seen with Whitworths. Really, the Whitworth is not a design that was ever pushed to its maximum potential limit. Even when new technology became available, only very minor things were done to it. Then you add variants that didn't address the problems of the design and it just exacerbated them. One of the first things would be to just put hands back on the design. Most machines have room for it, except maybe that slider version. Almost all the other versions of the Whitworth, you've got enough internal rooms to put in that hand actuator and its linkage myomer. And it would make the Whitworth a whole lot more useful around the base, allowing you to, bring crates around, move your own ammo rather than having other machines or lifters bring them around. So would just make the mech more useful in very wide situations. The one place where the Whitworth always really shines is just how cheap they end up being. A base Whitworth is about 2 million C-bills, reserve currency. And you don't need to put a whole lot of repair work into them, especially the more modern models with the fixed leg assembly. So they are a good value for money. Are they great mechs? That really depends on the commander that is behind them. So I thank you very much for listening to me for so long. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.